Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. Our guest brings all of this knowledge and experience to the conversation about this very relevant thing that happened in this country recently. We can talk about it all we want, but we are not entrenched in this world, but this guy is. But before we get to that, I'm entrenched with knowing how you're doing today, Tim. How are you?
I am great. Thanks a lot for asking. I do appreciate all the creative ways you end up asking me that. I'm very excited to be back on the air, and we've got a great guest today. His name is Jim Rathmann, and Jim Rathmann is an investigator, a TV personality, an Army veteran, and he was also a member of the United States Secret Service. And so that's a pretty great opportunity that we have to talk about really one of the sort of biggest moments in crime since we have been off the air. And it was something that I think everyone was fascinated by. It was the assassination attempt on Donald Trump on July 13th, 2024. And I want to be very clear that this is not a political conversation in any way. We are talking about crime. We are not talking about the politics involved in this. We do talk about conspiracy theories a little bit, which is interesting because depending on how much you've looked into this, you may have run into some of them more bonkers than others. But we get to ask a former United States Secret Service agent these questions after he watched the events unfold on that day.
Yeah, well put. Really great opportunity. And we had a conversation with Chloe Cantor and Dr. David Perlmutter about this topic. And those are four people right there, you, myself, Chloe, and Dr. Perlmutter, who are not, to my knowledge, a former member of the Secret Service, so all we could do is speculate along with the rest of the country that is in our position. And he was assigned to the protection of President Barack Obama and his family, Vice President Joe Biden at that time and his family, the Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney, and the vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan. I mean, there's been a number of other individuals that he's protected, prime ministers, other presidents. So this guy has experience, significant experience. So one thing that he was talking about, which we find extremely interesting and we can take away a lot from, is what broke down in the Secret Service protection of Donald Trump and what didn't break down. How did they do things right and how did they do things wrong? And the result was this. And to get that glimpse into that moment, it just kind of put me back to like the attempted assassination on Reagan and the successful assassination on Kennedy. If we had that opportunity in the moment to talk to somebody who is that familiar with the inner workings of the Secret Service, you'd take that in a second. You'd want somebody to come in and say, look, here's where they did it right. Here's where they dropped the ball. Because you don't want this to ever happen.
What fascinated me is really the conspiracies that developed online immediately. And Jim actually tells us how valid people's beliefs are that something bizarre happened there. So that's kind of an interesting angle, but then we talk specifically about some of the theories. So yeah, I mean, you know, we've talked about the JFK assassination several times here on this show. Like if Trump got assassinated, we probably would have talked about it here. If any other former president got assassinated in real time while we were doing this show, we probably would have covered it as well. So this is not a political conversation, just kind of fascinated by this moment in time. Okay, everybody, thanks a lot for listening. I hope you find this conversation as interesting as we did, and we're going to have Jim back very soon because we recorded another interview with him, and we're going to get into that. That's a story about a Swedish serial killer that I'm sure you're going to love, but that'll be coming up in a few weeks. So thanks a lot for listening, everybody. We appreciate it. Follow us on social media at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod.
And Tim, we're going to take a quick break for a commercial or two, and we will be right back with Jim Rathmann.
Welcome to the podcast, Jim Rathmann. How are you today?
I'm doing great, gentlemen. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing very well, but I'm having this moment of deja vu because you were on the show just recently, and we just quickly turned it around to have you back on to discuss another matter. But for anyone who needs to be reminded as to who you are, can you introduce yourself and refresh their memories?
Yeah, so my name is Jim Rathmann. I'm an investigative consultant. I currently do a lot of television work for true crime networks such as Investigation Discovery, A&E, Oxygen. I also do a lot for Inside Edition. I help out families all the time. I'm a former United States Secret Service, and before that, I work local law enforcement, everything from special response team, uniform patrol, undercover narcotics, and also homicide investigator.
Well, that sounds like a vast amount of jobs and services you've done.
Yes, sir. I've got a good history of work experience, and now I just try to spend all my time trying to bring families closures or do podcasts, spread the knowledge that I have, and help people to understand the situations that are going on in our country every day.
And all of that under the age of 29. That's so impressive.
Yes, sir. I went to work. I'll put it that way.
So yeah, let's get into this background a little bit. What was your first experience or your first job in law enforcement?
So my first job in law enforcement was I actually worked for what's called the city of Baker in Louisiana. It's in the Baton Rouge. Well, we call them parishes in Louisiana. I think everywhere else in the country they call them counties. So it would have been Baton Rouge Parish or Baton Rouge County. And so I worked for this small municipality doing uniform patrol. I was only there a short time frame before I moved over to the sheriff's office out in Livingston Parish. And I made that move because, one, I resided in Livingston Parish, and then also they just had a lot better equipment and a better way to promote and to be able to jump into the different areas that I wanted to work in. Like I wanted to work in narcotics or get a chance to work homicides and use my military experience and be a part of a SWAT team or special response teams. So that was my first taste in it.
Very cool. And you did some work with the Secret Service?
I did. So I worked in the United States Secret Service. I was under President Barack Obama's administration. So I did stuff for him and his family, protected them for probably a little over 3.5 years. In that time frame, I've also protected our presidential candidate, Mitt Romney. I've done Vice President Joe Biden at the time, who's now our current president. Basically every number one and number two from all over the world, prime ministers, foreign presidents. I've been fortunate to be in the right place at the right time and to be a part of, when I worked in the Secret Service, and it was incredibly rewarding to be able to stand next to the President of the United States. And I don't, regardless of who that person is and what their political views are, whether you're on the right side or the left side of the politics, that's still the most powerful person in the world. And so to be able to stand next to the most powerful person in the world and to be able to provide that protection and to be that close on a daily basis is quite rewarding. To me, it was the pinnacle of law enforcement career.
Yeah, I can imagine, right? I mean, you have sworn to an oath that is not even like an exaggeration, your life. You've sworn to give your life, if needed, to this person. And I'm wondering, what is the criteria that is put into place as you're moving forward in your Secret Service career? When you first get into this, how do they start to train you to adapt to that mindset?
Yeah, well, they're really selective about how they go about their process, and the interview process is quite long, and that's really where it started for me. I actually met some Secret Service agents while I was in Afghanistan in the Army. I was on my deployment, and they were telling me, I should go ahead and apply with my background, which I did. And that process is very lengthy. I mean, you're talking, a typical one-on-one interview you would get like you would have with most jobs. Then it's a panel interview board. There's, written examinations you have to take. They do a background check. I will tell you right now, the polygraph examination was a very, very, very long day. I had to show up to meet the polygraph examiner, and I remember getting there at 7:30 in the morning. We started at 8. I didn't walk out of that office until a little after 5 p.m. We went over my background so many times. We did that polygraph so many times. And, you're being truthful on it, but they're going to do what they do, and they're going to try to squeeze every little bit of juice out of you they can, if there's anything there. And once I finished that, it was about a week later, they contacted me, let me know that I had passed the polygraph, and they went and did the full background investigation. When they did it, they went all the way back to my teachers in my freshman year in high school. Because, of course, you're going to supply a list, and they know that you're putting your friends on there on that list. Well, they know they're going to speak highly of you, so they're going to go to your friend and say, all right, well, give me 5 names that aren't on this list. And then they just keep peeling it back. They'll go grab that yearbook and go through, see who you're associated with. And next thing you know, you got people talking about you that you didn't even know would even be questioned about your character. So it's a pretty in-depth process. But once you get through, it's incredibly rewarding.
Very interesting. And who ultimately selects you?
So it's done by a panel board. So once you have a completed packet, they have a boardroom that they go into, and they pull out the candidates, and they go through based on their assessment who they think fits the bill for the job. Is it physical fitness? Is it mental? What is that background? What was that overall number? It's almost like a draft board, right? You want to get the best people you can into that most recent class that's going to go through the Federal Law Enforcement Academy, and then bring up to the Secret Service to put through their very highly, and very intense training program. They're going to want the best of the best. So that's what they do. They pick the best ones. They make the job offers. And once you get that offer, you're off to the races.
Okay, so we are going to get into a recent assassination attempt. But Tim has a question.
Yep. Sorry. Before we get into that, I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned that there weren't any politics associated with protecting a president. I'm really happy to hear you say that, because that was one of the questions I had for you. But do you get close with these people that you're protecting? And do they select you, or if they didn't like you, can they have you removed? Like, how does that work, the actual interpersonal connection?
Oh, they can absolutely have you removed. I have a friend that was removed from the White House grounds for smoking a cigarette at about 2:30 in the morning, and was caught by the former First Lady, Michelle Obama, and she did not like the smoking aspect of it at all. And so he was completely removed from being in and around the White House, or the family for that matter. So, you can be removed at any time. When it comes to the politic aspect of things, you're there to protect the office of the President of the United States. So it really doesn't matter who's in there. You're a trained professional. Your job is to protect whoever that person is. And we take complete honor and pride in being able to do that. So there's times you get close enough where you could have a little bit of interaction, but for the most part, you're there to do your job. The ones who really get close to the president or their family members are usually the heads of the detail. So your agent in charge, things like that. They're the ones that really have that most communication. But it's rewarding. You get to see a lot of things that people don't typically get to see, which can be pretty cool.
So I would like to take it back to some assassinations and assassination attempts, successful ones, that took place in our history, because I want to really understand what was done right and what was done wrong. I don't know if during your training they would show you the videos of the Kennedy assassination and how the Secret Service reacted to that, and the Reagan attempted assassination and how the Secret Service reacted to that. Did you see any of those videos, and were you shown certain elements of that went right and went wrong in those scenarios? And also, what is your opinion on when something like this happens? What do you do? How do you make that quick decision in your brain that it's time to move into action?
No, that's a great question. So when I went through my training, yes, we absolutely learned from previous attempts. We didn't really go over the JFK one, only because it's so many years prior to when I came in. I'm not saying we didn't touch on it, but that wasn't a main focus. But President Reagan's assassination attempt by Hinckley over there at the Washington Hilton. We actually refer to that as the Hinckley Hilton for that particular reason. But we studied that video and that film and dissected it, and you go through it. We talk about it. We train with it, so it's kind of ingrained in your brain, so to speak. And then also there was, just accidents or random things that have happened. Like example, President Bush when we're dealing with the Iraq War, there was a press conference you had, and somebody threw a shoe, attacked with a shoe,
Oh yeah.
so we went over that, and so you try to use what has happened before to make sure it doesn't repeat itself. When you take an incident like what happened on July 13th, as unfortunate as it is, it becomes a fortunate situation because now you really get to dissect what went wrong and create new countermeasures and new ways to be able to stop any type of threat, because that is the number one purpose of the Secret Service, is to provide protection for the protectees. And it doesn't matter who that person is. We have to be flawless in our execution of those duties. And when you have somebody that is able to breach those levels of security, which I know we're going to get into, where there was some major flaws and things that have happened with the Secret Service with that, you have to be able to go back, you have to be open with it, you have to be honest with it, and you have to dissect it, and you have to come up with the new measures to ensure that this cannot happen again.
Great. So what, in your opinion, or just in your experience, you referenced the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. What was the first breach of security that happened, which then caused the successful, next step to happen? Or are there steps leading up to it? Like what was the first instance that didn't go the way it should have gone?
Again, another great question. So for me, I was actually in my living room. I thought I was watching a sporting event or something, and I saw the alert come across. So I immediately turned to the news, and you hear the shots going off, and they're kind of showing you bits and pieces. For me, for someone to be able to take off a shot, I was like, okay, how close were they? Where's the counter sniper team? And how did this person get in there with a firearm? So I initially thought there's no way they can be within the perimeter because you have magnetometers, so we do things by essentially, and I don't want to give away too much information, but you have what's called rings of security, right? So your most inner ring is going to be where the stage is, where the event's taking place, your people that are there to watch, your protectee, right? So we have to fortify that as much as humanly possible with, you have your counter sniper teams in there, you have your agents all over the ground, right? Then your next ring of security will be kind of like where your magnetometers are. And so, what you try to do is to prevent people from being able to penetrate that second ring of security without going through all the magnetometers. So you have what's called like checkpoints or choke points. So it doesn't allow you to just walk over this barrier, go around this building. There's people there, it's roped off. There's armed security there to force you to go in a different direction, and you flow everybody into a general spot where you might have 15 magnetometers set up. Every single person has to go through that magnetometer. And if you have medical conditions, we have hand wands, we can do physical checks, things like that. We have x-ray machines. So that way we're making sure that that inner perimeter is clean. You don't want it to be dirty. What we mean by dirty is something sneaks in that's not supposed to be in there. You want it to be a clean operation. But unfortunately, in this, it wasn't even just the second ring. It was even further back than that the problems happened, because this guy, the suspect in this, was able to literally walk around. He was able to cut through the buildings. He went through a magnetometer, spotted with a rangefinder. It was suspicious, but they stopped tailing him after a certain point, and they let him go, which then he came back. But he didn't go back to the magnetometers. He walked straight to the building. That stuff should have never have happened. Like it was a gross, and I hate to say the word negligent, but it was negligent from the start. And we can peel that back more based on the questions you guys have, but it was a failure from start to finish. I mean, that's just the reality.
Yeah. So I guess even before the event, take us to the then, like, because it's my understanding that these buildings and their roofs are supposed to be cleared. What happened in the case of the roof that the shooter shot from?
So initially, whenever you go to a site, you do the site survey. So I'll just explain it for everybody to kind of understand. You usually have advanced teams that go. We'll use the local field offices, like in this particular case, it would have been Pittsburgh, probably Philadelphia. Well, maybe not Philadelphia, but Pittsburgh, maybe somewhere in Ohio, and things like that. And you bring those local agents, and then you have an advanced team. So you do a site survey, which is we're going to look at and examine what we have in front of us. How many buildings, right? You got like almost like a Google Earth map. You're kind of mapping things out, and then you start walking it. We typically would secure from the top down, and the reason for that is you want to secure the line of sight because that's the threat that you really can't cover. So you want to make sure that line of sight is secured first. So by doing that, right, you'll secure the building. You put a security there. Nobody's allowed in. Nobody's allowed out. Whatever the case might be. But you want to get rid of that high ground because that's your threat. That's what you can't typically see, right? So we want to know what has view of the stage, what will have view of our protectee, and you start securing it. In this particular case, that really was the only main building that other than the water tower that was in the background. So you want to secure that, and then you start working it down from there. Because when it gets to the ground level, I can place people in like uniform patrol, cop or someone like that to stop people from walking up to that building, making them go through the parking lot, through the magnetometers, and so on. Like I can put people there. But what I can't predict is the high ground, whether there's windows and buildings and so on. That's the hardest part to secure. So that's why we do the top down. And then with this, I mean, my God, I don't know what the hell they did. To be quite honest with you, I just don't know how the only building there didn't have somebody on top of it, an agent or anyone. I mean, it was just completely unsecure. And it blows my mind because it just, I don't know, man, I'm still baffled. I just can't believe it because I know the process, and the process is so meticulous that you can't cut corners. And the people in the Secret Service are type A's. They're very driven, but there's a process, and everything has to follow the certain process. You can't cut the corners. So for that building to be that close and not have somebody on it, to me, not only was it negligent, but who abandoned the post? And you asked me earlier what my first thought was. When I knew that a person got a shot off from a roof, I literally said it, and I ended up saying it the next day on a talk show, who abandoned their post? Because that's about the only way somebody can be on that building is that somebody literally had to abandon their post.
Also, there were civilians who were just attending the rally who, have videos of him on the roof and are seemingly trying to alert the authorities about it before the shots were fired. How the heck did that happen?
All right. So I'll break this down a little bit further because there's a lot of talks about the way the communication works, which is true. Whenever we went to work details or to work events like this, you can't always get on everybody's radio frequencies. So the easiest way to say this was prior to 9/11, when 9/11 happened, with a lot of the responding departments, with the fire department and NYPD responding to the towers, they couldn't communicate with one another. That's just the way the FEC was set up at that time. Now, after 9/11, they've made a lot of changes to that. So you can get more interdepartmental communication. You can get those cross channels. But when the Secret Service goes in, we're only there for a few days. So it's hard to go ahead and download all their channels, all their radio frequencies, or give them ours because ours is a little bit sensitive. So typically what they do, and on every event that goes on, anyone, there's always going to be a command center, like a tactical command center, or referred to as like a TOC. And inside there, you're going to have somebody with the Secret Service that has the radio and direct communication to everybody that's there working the event on the Secret Service personnel side. You're going to have local law enforcement. So in this particular case in Butler, they were working on a special events channel. So it could be, hey, we're going to do a SWAT raid, and the SWAT team's working on that. It's a designated channel specifically for a special event. So that's what the local law enforcement's working on the ground. So we will put somebody from that department with that channel and that communication and sit them right next to the Secret Service. So as local law enforcement is repeating everything, it not only is it heard by the Secret Service agent in there, they can immediately relay the information to those on the ground. I have yet to hear what the radio communication is because I find it very hard to believe that information wasn't relayed to the detail or to the team, that there was some sort of chaos going on. perhaps that's the reason why there's agents that were put on paid administrative leave out of the Pittsburgh field office, because maybe they were the ones that were shooting down that information. But at the time that I spent in the Secret Service, if there was a known threat such as this, he would have never been on that stage. And if he was on the stage knowing this commotion's going on, he would have been pulled off that stage immediately. So I don't understand how that could happen. I really want to know what that radio communications were, because I know that there was somebody inside there communicating directly with Secret Service personnel that can immediately put out any bit of information to the detail.
Will that ever come out? Like, is that recorded, those channels?
They're supposed to be recorded, so they should be recorded by the 911 centers or any of that radio communication. Anytime you key up, you pretty much know which officer it was that keyed up, what their location is, things as that. So that all should be recorded. I hope that will come out in time, because I find it to be incredibly interesting that this event was able to continue with all that was going on, especially on the roof, known firearm. It's hard to believe that this could have happened with the Secret Service that I know about.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
All right, I'm going to further elaborate on the point you made that someone left their post on the roof. So basically you're saying there are two options. When you show up at this site and you see where the stage is going to be and you see where your speaker is going to be, and you look at the surrounding area and you see one building that could be a potential point for somebody to set up their system to assassinate the person speaking, and no one's there, there's basically two things that happen. They just neglected to put somebody there, or that person left that post. And so that's your idea, that's your theory, is that the person must have left that post. So what would be the reason someone would leave that post?
So it's actually not a theory anymore. That's what I had said immediately upon finding out a shot came from the roof, was that was the only way it could be possible, just because of how many details I've worked over the time and knowing how, securing sites go. That was the only thing that would have made sense. So, but it's no longer a theory. It's now known that they had a local law enforcement person that was supposed to be on that roof who thought it was too hot. So they walked away from that building because it was too hot. And lo and behold, this 20-year-old kid just happened to know that that's the roof I need to climb up on. And that because there's nobody up there, and I'm going to go ahead and take my shot. So I wasn't wrong in the fact that the post was abandoned. It legitimately was. And that command center that I'm talking about was inside that building. So inside that building that the shooter was on top of was the Secret Service personnel with local law enforcement, with the radios to include your emergency response. If all hell broke loose as it did, were located inside that same building, and on top of that roof is the shooter that's taking a shot at the former president of the United States with nobody physically on top of the roof other than the shooter.
I have two questions here. One, why wouldn't Secret Service be put there? Why would they leave that to local law enforcement? Not saying local law enforcement, not saying they're not capable of maintaining a secure location like that, but why wouldn't that be something that the Secret Service would do? And also, isn't that just like the wildest coincidence that it was too hot and they just happened to find the law enforcement official who didn't want to be in the heat, and it was hot, and then he left, and this 20-year-old happened to find the perfect spot for this shot?
I agree with you. There's no such thing as a coincidence. It has to be on purpose, in my opinion. And I try to always stay away from being a conspiracy theorist. But with this incident from July 13th, it's just my personal belief. I feel like there was some sort of help provided to this 20-year-old. I just don't know how you can outsmart the Secret Service, local law enforcement, know exactly where to go, what you can use, and everything that you used. There was nothing on that site to be able to countermeasure what it is that he was doing. Example for that, going onto that roof, he was concealed by the slight slope that was on that building. There was a small little wall on the edge of that building, so it provided him some sort of literally cover. The sniper teams couldn't see him, at least the ones that were close enough, because they would have had to go through a tree. The shot was fired from the other counter sniper team, which is on on a completely different rooftop, adjacent to the stage, in order to be able to take that shot. He knew to use a drone because there's no drones out on the site. And he had used a drone. He came with a rangefinder, so he knew exactly how far the distance was. Walked back to his vehicle, came back and was able to walk with a backpack that had a rifle in it, actually take it out, put it into operation, climb up onto a roof, and fire off a shot, and absolutely nothing is done about it. I just don't see how that is possible without having some sort of help and to know that somebody's feeding him information on this is where to go. To answer your first question as to why wasn't Secret Service on that roof, I'd like to know the same thing. I can tell you on very large events, when we don't have enough Secret Service personnel, you can use your state police, their state snipers, their state SWAT team. You could do the same thing with local law enforcement like they did with the county, also with the city of Butler. And so that's who they used to put there. They didn't have enough personnel. And I know that's part of the discussion now was that the Pittsburgh field office didn't send enough personnel. They sent more personnel to an 80-person dinner event for the First Lady than they did for a several thousand event for former President Trump. And that's where the problem comes from. They just did not have enough personnel.
It's so crazy to me. I don't want people to think that we're trying to stoke the flames of a conspiracy, and we're not conspiracy theorists. Someone got off a successful shot at a former United States president, and there was a gross negligence that took place in protecting this person, no matter where you are at politically. Someone was able to do that. And I think all we're trying to do here is just say, like, where were the holes so that we don't have these conspiracies blossoming? Because a lot of it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there's a lot that doesn't make sense, and I can most certainly understand why the public would be so confused. I mean, to have this type of gross neglect on a detail is unheard of. I mean, the Secret Service literally, up until that assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan in 1981, we haven't had a former president, a sitting president, get shot at. We've had a shoe thrown. We've had other incidents, but we haven't had a shooting, right? And to come millimeters from being able to actually take out the former president is alarming and shocking. And, when I talked earlier about we secured from the top down, how you funnel the rest of that, you have your third ring of security, and I didn't cover that. Your inner ring that we talked about where the stage and the personnel, your magnetometer, second ring, then there's a third ring. That's where you block off roads, right? So if there's a road or an alleyway that would have a clear shot, guess what? We're going to put a marked police car there and you can't turn down that road. And we're going to funnel you to where we can control where you're going to park. We can control how you're going to walk in. We can control you through the magnetometers. We have no problem with you going into the event and having a wonderful time, but we want to make it safe and clean for everybody. So that's why they have the meticulous process of being able to do that. But even that outer ring was messed up. That parking lot was open. People were able to walk through that parking lot. That parking lot should have been completely and utterly blocked off. You should have had no access to that building, whether it be on foot, once you get to the venue, anything. That building should have been completely off limits other than law enforcement personnel. So to have somebody walk off of that building because it was too hot, there's just too many things that didn't make sense. But what also confuses the public is how long it was taking to get information out. And what's far more alarming was the former director now of the Secret Service, Cheadle, 9 days after the shooting, and you still haven't visited the site. How the hell does that happen? Like, leaders lead. You have to lead. I don't care if she's at a dinner event, if she's out with her family, whatever the case is. On that Saturday, July 13th, the moment you heard that a former president was shot at, this is the first time in years that anything like this has happened. You drop everything you're doing, you get your butt in a car, you get on a plane, and you get over there, and you tell the personnel that's working there that when they get done with their duties for the day, they are to stay put, get some rest. You go there, you interview, you talk to your personnel, you find out what happened, and you lead on the ground. You don't lead back in D.C. 9 days later, still haven't been there, but let me show up to the convention. What the heck are we doing? Leaders lead. That's the bottom line. You can't lead from your desk in an office in D.C. after a shooting took place. So what does that do? That makes conspiracy theorists think more. It pisses the public off even more because we want info. And the director of the Secret Service doesn't even go out there and talk to their personnel. It took her, 3 days before she had her first conversation with one of the agents on the ground? I mean, completely unsat. You just can't do that.
So what I'm hearing is that all conspiracies are on the table because of the failures.
Like I said, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's pretty
Yeah.
hard to sit there and tell me that this wasn't some sort of, in some capacity, that there wasn't some sort of outside influence in some sort of way. Now, how big or how small, that I don't know, but I can't see how a 20-year-old cook or whatever, I think he was a cook if I'm not mistaken, was able to arm himself and to be able to outsmart the Secret Service, not only by flying a drone, showing up there a couple hours beforehand, going out there and doing all his counter surveillance measures, range finders, getting distances, where's the gaps, to be able to figure all that out and to do all this at 20 years old. And by the way, he was the worst marksman on his team at his school, and which thank God for that, because he wasn't able to actually take out former president, but he did unfortunately take out very innocent people there in the crowd. I just don't see how that's possible for a kid that has no military experience, no background, no intel assets, other than unless he was being helped somewhere. At this point, I just can't see how that can be possible.
Now, specifically, if you don't mind, just going down this rabbit hole briefly, I imagine you've watched a lot of the videos and done your due diligence on what happened, obviously. With respect to these conspiracy theories, can you comment on what's the idea of a second shooter? Have you heard about that one?
Oh, absolutely. When I watch the videos, and I can dissect what happened in and around the stage. So the initial agents immediately jumped on former President Trump. There are protective measures in and around that stage that is told to the protectees so they know. And so it's not like they didn't know that. And former President Trump knew to get to the ground immediately. His agents came right in, created a human shield, right? That's so the shooter can't shoot the intended target. That's part of your job. They did well on doing that. I mean, if you look at it from the moment you hear the pop from the shot, I mean, it wasn't even 2 seconds. They're already on top of him. So kudos to those individuals on the detail for putting their life on the line, immediately jumping into action and doing exactly what you're supposed to do. But and while they're on top of him, there's a few things that you're doing, because clearly he had blood coming from his ear and on his face. If anybody that has not been in combat that's listening to this, whether you're in law enforcement or whether you're in the military, you can train all you want to duplicate or replicate a combat-related scenario. But until you actually hear the whiz of a round being fired at you and the crackling and the sound that it makes, and it's real, your life is legitimately on the line. This is not a training situation. You go into what's known as that fight or flight response, your physiological response that you get. Blood pressure increases, tunnel vision. Some people can react immediately. Some people get frozen in time. And, I've seen it in the military and firefights before, where people legitimately freeze, and it takes them a little bit before they can get control of themselves to realize, maybe I need to move right now. And so you kind of see some of that. But in addition to that, you can get shot and not even know you've been shot. And that's well documented with people that have been shot before and had no idea. 20, 30 seconds later, they still don't know they're shot because their adrenaline's so high. So one of the things that they were going to do while on the ground, while they're on top of former President Trump, was they're checking him for bullet holes, because he probably doesn't know if he's been shot or not, other than what they can see coming off his face. So they're physically checking him. And that's one of the things you need to do, because if he has a wound in his stomach, anywhere else, you want to be able to start relaying that information so you can get emergency medicine to him, right? There's doctors there. There's ambulance personnel there, anything that you need. So that's one of the things they would do. After that, though, that's where everything, in my opinion, went wrong. They did all that part right, but now, they're there on the ground for a minute. One, it was taking too long to get him off the stage. They had to get the vehicle backed up so they can get him into the vehicle. But at that point, he is no longer in charge. I'm not going to let him stand there and put his arms up and be exposed, right? because of the initial shot. You also don't know if there's a second shooter. And that's where you brought up the second shooter theory. They left him completely exposed to the left side of that stage, to where they were facing the crowd. So to their left, he was right there, fist pumping up to the crowd. If there was a second shooter, he's got a direct line of sight. And that, to me, I'm like, what on the hell are they doing right now? He should have had his head ducked down, like literally physically push his head down. You have your wall around him, and you are literally moving him at lightning speed to that vehicle. You get him in that vehicle. If you got to lay on top of him, you lay on top of him, and you get the hell out of there. But you don't have time to stand there and put your arm up and pump up the crowd. And as iconic as that will be going down in the rest of our time, that shouldn't have happened. He should have never been exposed for that, because if there's a second shooter or a third shooter, but keep in mind, there's always copycats, right? So now this could have been a test. How does this work for the next time? How are we going to react to it? It's the same thing when we were in Afghanistan or those that served in Iraq. An IED goes off. How do you respond to the IED in the ground? Do we back up? Do we go forward? What is our tactics? Once they learn your tactics, well, what do you think they're going to do next? They're going to use our own tactics against us. So you have to always be thinking about these things. So when they stood him up, he should have been completely covered in that vehicle and freaking gone. You're not in charge, Mr. President. I'm sorry. We love you, but this is how we're going to love you. We're going to get the hell out of here alive. That's it. But for him to stand there all that time, man, that to me, my heart was pumping.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to know, what do you think was said during those moments that you know of? Like, what was said during that moment that caused them collectively to think like this was a good idea? Because I remember a story, and I'm going to get some of the details wrong, so I'm going to be vague, but I remember during 9/11 when Dick Cheney, the vice president at the time, was in a certain location, and it wasn't even like an immediate danger to him, but I remember hearing stories about the Secret Service like literally pulling him out from his seat by his like belt loops and like manhandling him to get him out of there, because they didn't know what the status of Bush was. They didn't know if they needed to keep they obviously needed to keep the vice president safe, but I remember reading a story or hearing it on the news where he didn't want to leave, and they literally had to like almost like rip him out of the seat. So what's the difference there? Like, what was said where, like, how did Trump convince them? Like, no, I need to stand up. Like, I just don't get that.
So I think, and that's kind of what it comes to. You kind of get that chaos of combat, so to speak, or like the chaos of the situation, right? He's alive. You're protecting him. There's a shooter out there. You can't sit there and tell me you're not nervous or scared. Somebody just shot at you. You're going through all of that at that particular moment. What they were saying, you could hear some of it. It was picked up on some of the microphones, and they're saying some code words, which I would love to say what it is, but I'm not going to put what the Secret Service code words are out there. But they're letting them know that there's assets that are here, right? They got the radio communication that the shooter is down, because at that point, that very last shot you heard, about 11 seconds after the first shot, was actually when the sniper shot and took out the shooter, okay? So they know now on the radio the shooter is down. It's confirmed. So they're not worried about that threat so much anymore. But at no time did they think about a second shooter. And so they're like, okay, let's get him up. Let's get him ready to move. And so they're trying to do it in unison. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, move. So they're trying to do that so everything goes all at once. So you're still keeping him protecting that human shield. The problem is that they didn't force him down, so you can't physically see him within that shield. So when he stood up, he's what, 6'4"? So he's quite tall. Most of the detailed members are tall. You can't allow him to be exposed like that for that amount of time. Other than what we heard there, I don't know what allowed them to do that. I don't know if there was an agent in charge telling them what to do through the radio channels. Maybe that will come out in time. But from what we could hear and what we know there on the, from what we've picked up, they tried to move in unison, and then they just left them exposed again.
Sorry, if you don't mind indulging me one more time on these conspiracy questions. I'm just wondering, like, how crazy is the conspiracy theory that he wasn't actually shot at all?
So I've heard that quite a bit, where some people are like, this is a staged event. Well, if there's a staged event, why would a firefighter be dead? Why would there be multiple people wounded in the crowd? Why would President Trump came within millimeters of having his life taken? And then you hear people sit there and say, well, he wasn't actually shot. It was just glass fragments. Well, what do you think stopped that bullet? That was the teleprompter that was shot at, that broke off. And so whether that hit him or not, it's still a bullet. It's still coming at you. You were the intended target. So for anyone to sit there and make these assumptions that he wasn't actually shot at, he was never actually shot, how many you going to allow somebody to take a shot at you, come within a millimeter, allow something to puncture your ear and cause all that blood down the side of your face? If you're willing to rely on somebody else to take that shot and not be nervous at all, I don't know how on earth that could actually be staged. I mean, common sense has to come in at some point for some of these people.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
And what's your opinion, unless I got this wrong, the body of the shooter was cremated?
I mean, I don't really know. They would have taken the photos. I mean, really, I don't really know what the body is necessarily going to do at this particular point, multiple days into the investigation, even if it was only a few days into the investigation. He's deceased. We seized what was on his person, right? So whether he had cell phones, pagers, intel maps, anything like that, all that was taken. That's where the evidence is. What are you going to get out of a dead person's body? Nothing. It's not like he has a hidden microchip in him or something like that. So, I mean, you release the body back to the family and he can get cremated or do whatever, but that's not, I mean, there's plenty of photos and there's stuff that was leaked that clearly shows that this person was shot and killed. I don't think that's a disputable thing. So releasing the body back, I mean, holding on to the body isn't going to do anything for you.
So I was reviewing some of the video, and I saw that there were snipers on other roofs who seemed to have known that this shooter was there, but they didn't fire before he did. And obviously, when he started firing, they shot him very quickly. But can you take us through how could that be possible? Is that more radio frequency miscommunication, or is that a chain of command that kind of came into play there?
That's a good question, and that's where those radio communications are going to be very critical to what actually transpired. I can say that the counter sniper teams with the United States Secret Service are by far some of the absolute best shooters in the world. Their tact, their demeanor, everything about them is exactly what I would want protecting me or my family if I was in a situation like that. They don't have to have permission from an agent in charge to be able to fire off that shot. If they deem this threat and it is a true life threat, that's why they're there. Are they going to sit there behind their weapon the whole time scanning with a rifle being pointed at everybody? No. They use their binoculars until they see the threat. So at some point they were alerted to something, because you can see it on the side view video that has President Trump talking, and you see the snipers on the roof like they're trying to focus in on something. Remember, you have that little bit of a wall that was concealing the shooter. You also had trees, so they may not have been able to get a clear view of him. Okay? So once they saw that, they can take out that threat. I think what people are getting confused with is local law enforcement. It was the local law enforcement snipers that actually took the picture of the shooter as he was wandering around, and they're saying this guy's really suspicious and kind of passing that photo. For them, they may have needed the permission or waiting on the Secret Service to act or give them the permission to take the shot. So that could have been the communication gap when it comes to the snipers. But I can assure you, if that original sniper team was focused in and had a clear line of sight, knowing that this guy's armed, threat, and now pointing a rifle, it would have ended well before that, but they couldn't see him. So it had to come from another sniper team that probably had to pick up their equipment, readjust to a spot where they can get it, focus in on it, and take the shot.
All right. Well, we are coming up to a election in November, and in January there'll be the swearing in and the inauguration. And regardless of who wins this election and who's going to be up there accepting it, how does this event change the security and the Secret Service for when a new president is being sworn in?
No, it's a great question. I'm sure that's probably on a lot of people's minds. I've worked inaugurations before. And that is probably the longest day you'll work in the Secret Service, because it's 2 or 3 days with very minimal sleep. all hands on deck. So absolutely everybody is pretty much working that because of the amount of people, local law enforcement. But they've done it for so many years. They're pretty good at being able to. Everybody that comes in here to watch that day has to go through magnetometers, goes through their checks, and so on. Even though there's hundreds of thousands of people, that's how much equipment and personnel it takes in order to be able to run that. So I can't sit here and say specifically what tactics they're going to change that are going to be different, but I think there's a higher level of threat. And I think what you'll see different this year and last is probably a lot of, if I had to guess, I would say probably a lot of drones that are monitoring the areas that are blocked off and closed off. You'll probably have more uniform patrol being present, and you'll probably have more people guarding posts to ensure that nobody can go into certain buildings where, if the windows are all closed before, none of those windows should be opened at all. And there's going to be more personnel being more diligent in what they're observing and what their duties are, while your detail itself are protecting the protectees, because you're going to have the former president, former first lady, you're going to have even previous presidents to that. Maybe George W. Bush will be there, former President Barack Obama, Michelle Obama. So there's going to be a lot of people. So there's going to be a lot of agents working these details. What all measures they're going to put in, I'm not sure. But I can assure you that they are going to secure that place every square inch. It's kind of what they've built on for so many years. And, those that are standing posts are going to be a hell of a lot more diligent than they've ever been before because of the amount of threats, to include international threats we've got at this point. Hope that made sense.
Yeah, that definitely made sense. And hopefully we're not having a conversation in late January about something that went wrong during the inauguration. Hopefully we're looking at it and saying, okay, they have all of the systems in place, all of the people are in place, all the personnel is in place, and it goes off without a hitch regardless of who is standing there making that acceptance speech.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, for chatting with us here today. We really appreciate your time and your knowledge.
Well, thank you for having me. And, the last thing, if I can just have a moment here, I think a lot of people get so fixated on their political aisle and what they think and who they dislike. But at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or Republican, even if you're a senator, a member of Congress, nobody deserves to be shot at and have their life taken by being involved with politics that's supposed to better our country, and however they see that is. I would be just as upset if this happened to any former president, any future president, any member of Congress, member of Senate. I don't care what their political affiliation is. Nobody deserves to have an assassination attempt on them. And I hope people can dial it back in and realize that what happened to former President Trump should never happen to anyone at any time. So to discredit whether he was hit with glass or hit with a bullet or whatever the case is, there are still people there that died that are no longer, and their families are now grieving. And we have to have a sense of decorum, and we have to come together as a family or as a country and realize that we can't continue to go in the direction we're going, and we need to not accept this type of hatred that's just being spread and running rampant throughout our country. It's got to stop. It doesn't matter where you are. It's got to stop. We're American. At the end of the day, we're American. We all breathe the same air. We bleed the same color. And that's just, I hope people can get to that level and understand that. Believe in what you want to believe, but drop the hate.